Today, we're going to be talking about something that every pilot deals with on every single flight, and that's airport operations. There really is a lot going on at these airports.
Runway incursions. There's just so much going on.
Southwest flight that was coming into land ignored completely what they were told. Right before it was about to land, went around. That could have been hundreds of people dead right there.
Radio frequencies, runway information, pattern information, location, airport reference point, time zone, so much information.
Pretty overwhelming, actually. A virtual flight that departs Prescott, where we are based, and that's going to go into Cottonwood. How do you know that you're on the right glide path at the airport?
It looks like a solid yellow line and then a dashed yellow line.
Worked at an airport that went from runway 4 to runway 5. And the hotspot tells you that the tower can't see you at that spot. So just keep that in mind.
You have strobe lights. You have one on the tail and then one on the front of each of the wingtips.
So the first time you get to the airport, I will always recommend you overfly the airport at 1,500 feet. Not just me, the FAA recommends that as well. Do you remember the different types of NOTAMs? And welcome back to another episode of The Flying New Guy, where we cover all the aviation topics that you need to know in order to earn your pilot certificate. And as always, we've got Jason with us. He's a student pilot who's been making great progress. So nice work, Jason.
Thank you.
And today we're going to be talking about something that every pilot deals with on every single flight, and that's airport operations. So Jason, be honest, when you first started, did you have any idea of everything that happened around an airport?
No way.
There really is a lot going on at these airports, between the markings, between the signs, taxi instructions, lights, traffic pattern, NOTAMs, and everything else that's involved. It's just pretty overwhelming, actually. And it's easy to make a mistake. Is there anything that you can think of that seems pretty unlikely at first, and you're like, how does this even happen? And then now you're like, I can see that happening.
Runway incursions. There's so much going on.
Even more experienced pilots actually have made that mistake. And so runway incursion is a big deal, and that's definitely one of the topics that we're going to be talking about today. But instead of just running down kind of the list of all the different topics, we're going to be using scenario-based training and some scenarios. For example, taxiing out at a towered airport to landing at a non-towered airport. So you ready?
Ready?
All right, let's get it going. Really what we're going to be doing is looking at a virtual flight that departs Prescott, where we are based, and that's going to go into Cottonwood. Cottonwood is P52. It's a small airport. It's about 20 miles away northeast of here. So apart from the size of the airport, what is the difference between Prescott and Cottonwood?
Towered versus non-towered.
That's right. Tower versus non-towered. So what does that mean? What does a towered airport mean?
It has a control tower.
As a control tower. Okay. So from an operational perspective, what does that mean for you?
It means that someone is going to be controlling. Control towers go generally with controlled airspace. Someone is controlling you coming into the airport, landing, giving you taxi instructions around the airport.
Yep.
All of that. There's somebody in charge.
Do you have to follow what they say?
Yes.
Yes.
Unless there's an emergency.
Well, yeah, possibly. And then it's still better to communicate with them and they'll help you. What can happen if you don't follow what they say?
Get a deviation.
That's right. Can get a deviation. What about non-towered airport then?
There are procedures and you should follow those procedures, but you aren't required to.
You can still get in trouble if you don't do things as the rules, right? Do you have to talk on the radio at those airports? No, you don't.
No,
right?
you don't.
Yeah. Is it a good idea to talk?
Yeah.
Yes, it is a good idea. What frequency would you be using to do that?
The CTAF frequency.
CTAF. Do you know what CTAF stands for?
Common Traffic Advisory Frequency.
Common Traffic Advisory. That's right. So as long as you have the proper equipment, you can fly either to a towered, non-towered airport without a problem. There's a little airport southeast of Cottonwood that's called Montezuma. Do you know that airport?
I think it's a private airport.
Okay. What does that mean?
It means that somebody owns it.
Somebody owns it?
It's not a public airport.
So can you fly there?
With permission from the owner.
From the owner. Okay. So that's pretty important. Do you know how you find out if that airport is private or not? Where would you get that information?
The chart supplement or the chart itself.
Yeah. The chart. What does it say on the chart?
There's two options. It says PVT if it's a hard surface runway.
Yeah.
Or it's an open circle with a P in the middle. Or an R, not a P.
R.
An R.
Restricted. Yeah. What about Gila Bend? That's another airport. Do you know about that one?
Military?
Military airport, yeah. Can you fly there? No.
No.
Can you fly there in an emergency?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So there is an accident a couple years ago where I've talked about this accident before, where the guy kind of kept hopping between airport and airport and airports, and then ended up talking to a controller at a military airport And the controller, quite frankly, I don't think did the best job that they could helping this person, but he was shy of going there for an emergency.
Mhm.
And unfortunately, he died crashing short of that runway at that airport because he didn't want to declare an emergency. So yes, you can go to those airports in an emergency situation. We've got civil airport open to the public, right, to recap, military not open to the public, and then private request permission from the owner. That's airports. Let's talk about some pre-flight preparation. Before you even start the engine, you need to know the airport environment. So what is the first place that you're going to look for that information about the airport before you depart?
Probably the chart supplement.
Chart supplement, that's right. So what kind of information do we get out of the chart supplement?
What kind of information?
Yeah, what
we
you
get so much information.
So much
about
information.
that
Name
airport.
some.
We get a bunch of radio frequencies. We get runway information, pattern information, location, airport reference point, time zone, closest city. We get contact information for the airport manager. We get what kind of services and fuel are available.
Yeah.
Airspace.
Yeah.
So much information.
Airport diagram.
Airport diagram.
Airport
for
diagram
most.
is a big one. Yeah, for most. That's right. Yeah, I mean, you named a lot. That's great. How long are the chart supplement good for?
56 days.
56 days. Yeah. And then how many are there? Or how are they organized?
There's 7 regions, and then there's just listed by state within that region.
Yeah. So here we're in. Do you know what region we're in?
Southwest.
Southwest. Yeah. Do you know what states are in our AFD? Yeah.
California, Nevada, Colorado, Utah, Arizona, and New Mexico.
Yep. That's right. You would get one of those. The date is in the front of it, right? You have to make sure you have the right one. Where can you get those?
The FAA's website.
The FAA's website. Yeah, you can download them for free, right? So yeah, we'll put a link down in the description for that. Okay, let's talk about the airport diagram. So it's a big part of the chart supplement, and that's always pretty useful when you're flying to especially busy airports, but really for any airport. When you look at the airport diagram, what is the most important thing that you're going to try to find? As a pilot, what's the piece of information that you're going to be interested in? It's more than one, really.
Runway length and width.
And layout.
And yeah, absolutely layout. But where am I going to land? Is there enough space for me to land?
Yep. Getting familiar with the layout of the airport is super important because when you arrive at the airport, right, you're going to look at it on your map here with the north up. And when you get to the airport, you may be coming from the south, right? So it's going to look like this, right? So you have to kind of get familiar. It is a lot easier now, I think, with the G1000. But I remember as a student pilot kind of like turning my map around as I'm getting to the airport because I'm like, okay, this is the direction I'm going to be flying. This is what the layout is going to be because when you get closer to it, in some cases, it's kind of weird to say, but the layout is not as obvious as you might think. And then thinking, okay, runway 11, where is runway 11? And I have to do a left pattern for runway 11. Okay, what does that look like? So having that orientation and kind of imagining which way you're going to come in and picturing what that airport looks like is to me at least, is very important. There's one thing that you can find on the airport diagram that we haven't talked about, which is the hotspot. What's a hotspot?
Yes. The hotspots are areas that other people have had trouble with directions, with taxiway coming together, or something like that, where you're likely to make a mistake.
Yeah. How are they marked on the diagram? Do you know?
It's like a square box with an arrow that says HS.
Where do you find that information in the chart supplement?
It's at the. So there's a section for hotspots, and there was no other information about Prescott. Just said Prescott, and then had the hotspots. And then
there's a hotspot
Phoenix,
section,
and then
So there's a section in the chart supplement. I think it's section 3 or section 4, where you go in, and that's where the diagrams are in more detail, right?
Okay.
You have it in the what's called the AFD, the Airport Facility Directory, which used to be the name of this document, by the way. Chart supplement used to be AFD. But inside of the chart supplement, section 2 is the AFD itself, which is hundreds of pages of airports. And then within that, there is a little section where you have a small airport diagram. But if you go to the next section, then there is a section in there with just the airport diagram for the bigger airports. And that's where you would find the mention of the hotspots. And then right underneath that section, there's a section about describing the actual hotspot. So they say, typically pilots have issues seeing the taxiway sign here and have a tendency to do a runway incursion. Whoops. Okay, well, you probably want to know about that. Prescott has changed over the years. There's only one hotspot left, and the hotspot tells you that the tower can't see you at that spot. They just don't have a visual of where you are. So just keep that in mind. So yeah, those hotspots are pretty important. Runway slope also is listed on here, which I think is pretty important. Taxiway labels, you want to be familiar with these taxiways. What I do is when I listen to the ATIS when I'm at the airport, and then I kind of figure out, okay, which runway are we going to be using, because it tells you. And then I'm like, okay, which path am I likely to be getting? And I start to kind of draw it in my head. Okay, they're going to tell me to go on Charlie, Delta, and do this and that, and hold short of this. So you're ready for something, because sometimes they give you the clearance, and then you have to think, especially if you're not familiar with the airport, right?
Yep.
Okay, which way is this and which way is that? So it's good to kind of prepare yourself in your head ahead of time. Okay, these airport diagrams, sometimes they have symbols that are puzzling. Where would you find that information?
There is a legend in all of the chart supplements that goes through everything.
Every bit. That's for you. If you're in the course and you can't find something, go to the legend and go find it. And if you can't find it in there, then reach out. But we see a lot of some people reaching out and say, hey, what does that mean? Well, if you should be able to find that on your own, right? You should be able to go into that legend and find it. Okay, so let's talk about runway numbers. How are they determined?
By the magnetic heading rounded to the nearest 10.
Okay. So runway 5 is oriented on 5 degrees.
Rounded to the nearest 10.
Okay. So runway 5 would be what?
050.
050. Okay. So we add a 0 at the end of it. Okay. And are they oriented based on magnetic or based on...
Magnetic.
True. Okay.
Magnetic.
Based on magnetic. That means what? Over time?
They may change.
They may change. They will likely change. I talk about this in the course. Actually, this is something that the students, when we meet students in person, they mention almost that example all the time. They say, I love when you give examples. And for example, the runway one.
Yep.
I worked at an airport that went from runway 4 to runway 5 because it was runway 044 for a very long time. And they changed to 045. So now it get rounded up. 045 to 050 would be that. And then 051 to 054. And then after that, it changes again. So over time, these will definitely change. And then you can see on those more detailed airport diagrams, you can see the actual 3-digit number. So you can see it's runway 273, for example.
With a decimal point too, right?
Yes, with a decimal point. Yeah. And it changed over time. Some things also, sometimes you're going to see runway 27 Charlie. What does that mean?
27 center.
Yep.
So there's 3 runways there, and that's the middle one.
That's the middle one. Yep. And then obviously we have runway 21 left, 21 right. Those are easy. Speaking of magnetic and true, the ATIS information, like the wind and is that magnetic or true? So the saying is, if you hear it, then it's magnetic.
It's magnetic. If you read it,
see it. Yeah. If you read it, then it's true. If you read it on the internet, it's even more true. Okay. Let's take a look at Prescott, for example. Each runway looks quite a bit different, quite frankly. We have runway 30 that has numbers and then no markings on the threshold. Runway 12 has numbers and a threshold marking, but it doesn't have any marking further down as runway 21 left has, for example. Do you know why runways look different at different airports?
They're used for different things or available for different things.
Okay.
Like the smallest runway at Prescott, I don't think it's an instrument. It has an ILS.
Okay. So
I think the other two have ILS.
Yes.
Okay.
So there's what's called a visual runway, more basic runway, versus a runway that has a precision approach and then a non-precision approach. So these have different types of markings on them. But yeah, you get the right idea. And now let's get to the runway markings themselves and what they actually mean. The runway centerline, right? That's kind of on every type of runway, right? Yep. We have a centerline that's kind of a requirement. These are, do you know how long the strips are?
I do not know.
So there's a bit of logic there, actually. The strip plus the gap is 200 feet long. So it's a good reference, right? To know, to try to measure something. The strip in itself plus the gap until the next strip. So from the beginning of the strip to the beginning of the next strip it's 200 feet, 120 feet for the strip and an 80-foot gap in between. So that's a good thing to have. Then we have the threshold marking, which is the beginning of the landing surface. From time to time, we have the landing surface that's slightly different than the actual beginning of the runway. What is that called?
Displaced threshold.
Displaced threshold. So what is the displaced threshold? What does it do?
It allows you to use that area for takeoff, but not for landing.
But not for landing.
Because
it's
a different type or a different material.
It's a different material, yeah. Do you know why we have displaced threshold? Typically is because of, on the approach end of the runway, there is some sort of obstacle. That means that they need to displace the threshold, but why not use the rest of that with a cheaper surfacing and use that for takeoff, right? Landing typically requires a little bit less distance, but taking off requires more distance. So let's use that, and it makes runways a little bit cheaper, and then it utilizes the space a little bit better as well. Now, the threshold in itself has different strips. You know why we have different numbers of strips?
It's different width of the runway.
Different width of the runway.
And I remember there is a chart that you had in there, but I don't remember.
No,
what each.
And
it was like 4, 8, 4, 6, 8, 12, 15?
16.
16.
Yeah, good. That's actually impressive.
But I don't remember what the corresponding numbers are.
The typical runways, and I shouldn't say that, but a 150-foot runway is 12 stripes, for example. That's what you see quite a bit. And obviously, the fewer stripes, the skinnier the runway. So I don't know that you need to know exactly the number, because you can find the actual width of the runway in the chart supplements. But it's good in your head to kind of associate these two numbers, right? 4 strips and 16, you're probably in Phoenix landing at a big airport, a 200-foot wide runway. Then we have the touchdown zones. These are for the first 3,000 feet of the runway, and they have markings every 500 feet. And then there's the aiming point, which is a thick white block, right? And that's 1,000 feet from the threshold. So again, those are good references to kind of have. Most people try to land on the numbers, which is not always required, right? You can just try to use that as your aiming point and then flare and then possibly land before you hit the aiming points, the actual official aiming points. But yeah, that's what it is. The displaced threshold, what kind of marking are on the runway, do you know, to indicate that it's a displaced threshold?
There are arrows.
Yep.
And then
what
a
color?
Bunch of white.
White.
And then a bunch of like greater than or less than signs up to the threshold line, right?
Yeah, arrows, the pointy arrows. Is that what you're talking about?
Well, yeah, there are like arrows that are just like this, and then there's a couple arrows that have on center line.
Let's talk about everybody's favorite tool, because from time to time, the chart supplement doesn't have the most updated information. So what do we have that helps us with information that needs up to date?
NOTAMs.
NOTAMs. Okay. What does NOTAMs stand for? As of today in 2025. Sorry, I'm being sarcastic.
Notices to airmen.
Notices to airmen. Okay. So the reason we're joking, it's been called Notices to Airmen for a long time. It was changed to Notices to Air Mission, and it was changed again back to Notices to Airmen. So officially, as of right now, it is Notices to Airmen. So what is that? What does Notices to Airmen do?
Gives you information that hasn't been included in the chart or the chart supplement.
Yeah, and that's because of the 56 days, right? Yes. Do you remember the different types of NOTAMs?
I remember that there were 4. There's D, NOTAM D.
Yep.
FTC.
Yep.
Pointer.
Military. Yep. And there's one that's called SAA notices. And there's technically one that's called GPS NOTAM as well, that gives information about NOTAMs. And then there's one that's called FICON NOTAM as well. NOTAM D is the most common. What is that?
The way I understood it, that was pretty much everything to do with things on the ground.
Yes.
Like the surface.
Yep. That's airport information, nav aids, lighting, taxiways, and all that. That's going to be the most common, like I said. D for distant, stuff that happens, at the destination airport or at the airport that you're taking off at. FDC.
Are you asking what it stands for or what the NOTAMs are about?
Well, both.
Flight data center?
Yeah, flight data center.
And then that was anything about procedures or airspace or instrument stuff.
Yep. And then funny enough, TFRs, temporary flight restrictions, get issued with an FDC NOTAMs. Pointer NOTAM
Points to another NOTAM.
points to another NOTAM. Why is that? What's the point of that?
You may have a NOTAM in an area that isn't very close to an airport.
Yeah.
And so they want to point you to another, NOTAM.
Or it's a busy area with a bunch of airports, and then you're in Prescott, and there's Cottonwood, right? Maybe there's a pointer NOTAM, although they're pretty far apart. But if you had airports that were really close to each other, if you're at that airport, you would be pointed to something else. Military NOTAM, I think it goes without saying, that's a different format. And then SA Notice is the Special Activity Airspace. So that changes the activation of special activity areas like restricted, MOAs, and things like that. Where can you find these NOTAMs?
The FAA's NOTAM search.
Yep. And then where else?
ForeFlight.
Yeah, ForeFlight is actually pretty good at that as well. ForeFlight has a good way of presenting the NOTAMs. Speaking of presenting the NOTAMs, so I did some research. It's funny enough that we're talking about this. I did some research yesterday because I'm rewriting the NOTAM section in the course. And since 2013, the FAA has said that they are going to switch NOTAMs to ICAO format. So believe it or not, in the US, we have a format that's called domestic. That's the FAA format for NOTAMs. And the rest of the world uses a very different format, completely different format, as a matter of fact. The FAA is a bit more shorthand. The ICAO is a bit more detailed. But it's been years now that the FAA has said, we're going to be switching. Hey, by the way, get ready, we're going to be switching. The latest was that we were supposed to switch in December of 2024, and it did not happen. So they had all these presentations available for people to say, get ready, it's happening. As a matter of fact, if you go on the FAA website now for NOTAMs, as of late, it displays domestic and ICAO format in a tab. So you can click on either tab and see the two formats. So it's coming, maybe by 2030, who knows? But eventually we will, I think, be using that. So if you're watching this, I recommend that you get familiar with the ICAO format, especially if you plan on being a commercial pilot, an ATP, because you will see, currently it is called the international format. So there's an international NOTAM technically as a type, and it's coming. So learn how to read those. They're not super difficult, actually. We're going to have both of them included in the course. So, and then eventually we will when the FAA decides to make the change, we'll sunset the other explanation. By the way, are you feeling stressed about your upcoming Checkride? Well, our free private pilot study sheet can help calm your nerves. It covers the most important topics that you need to know for your Checkride in a user-friendly format. This way, you can walk in feeling prepared and not stressed. Click below to download. Before you call up the ground at a tower at airport, like in Prescott, for example, there's one last thing that you need to do to make sure that you have the latest information.
Listen to the ATIS.
Listen to the ATIS. Okay, so what's the ATIS?
Automatic Terminal Information System?
Service.
Yep. And it provides you with weather and other information about like what runway is in use and all of that for the airport.
Yep. How often is it updated?
Once an hour?
Yep, hourly, unless conditions changes.
Yeah, unless necessary.
Yeah. And then how do you know that you have the latest?
You'll tell the tower you have information, whatever.
X, yeah. It starts with alpha, and then it
yeah.
just keeps on going.
And then if they tell you, well, we just switched, then you go back and listen to it again.
When is it updated?
Top of the hour?
Yeah, top of the hour. They start like at 50, I think, and then push it. Now, let's say that your airplane is parked down at the FBO ramp, right?
Okay.
How far can you taxi on that ramp before you need to talk to someone at a tower airport?
Until you reach the movement line?
Yeah. So what does it look like?
It looks like a solid yellow line, and then a dashed yellow line.
Kind of like a hold short line, but
like
single.
Half, yeah.
But single lines on each side. When do you know you're on what side? Is the dash line on the side of...
The solid line is on the side where you need to get approval before you cross it.
So you can't cross that line.
Right.
You can get into the non-movement area without clearance, but you can't get out.
Can't go the other way.
Okay, that's good. That's very important. So you've got the ATIS, you're ready to go, you call up ground, and then you say that you're ready for taxi. how do you prepare for your clearance? Because we can talk a little bit about this.
Get ready to write it down.
Yep, get ready to write it down. And that's important, I mean, some people over time, you just remember it. But even today, I still like to write mine down. Because as you start to taxi, you want to have something that you can look at just to remember. It's just a personal preference on my part.
I haven't flown yet, but I don't know how you could do it without writing it down right now.
Oh, you can't.
You know?
I mean, yeah, not right now, for sure.
It seems like it'd be so overwhelming to try to pick up the whole route in 8 seconds and, and memorize it without writing it down somewhere to have it as reference.
So what can you expect in that clearance?
They're going to give you your taxi route, right?
Yep.
To whatever runway is in use.
To the runway that you're cleared typically. So it can be different things.
Okay.
It can be a partial clearance where there's a runway to cross to get to your destination runway.
Mm-hmm.
Then they're going to clear you to that first. And then you're going to call back when you get there. So in Prescott, for example, if it's runway 321, if you get to runway 3 from where we have our airplane, you're going to have to hold short of runway 1230. And so they'll tell you potentially to go there and then hold short, or to just cross it. It depends.
Mm-hmm.
But if they tell you to go there, typically that's going to be the clearance. So they're going to say clear to and to that intersection. So it depends. But yeah, they'll tell you the destination where you're clear to and then how to basically follow. And then you're going to read that back. Very important. And then if you don't understand or you're not sure, what you're going to say?
Going to say that I don't understand her.
So say what? You're going to say again. There's something, there's a term where they can help you with taxi by giving you guidance. Do you know what it's called?
A progressive taxi?
Progressive taxi, yeah. So don't be afraid to ask for that. It's okay. It's pretty easy to get turned around on the ground, especially at the bigger airports that have a lot of taxiways. And you're trying to follow your clearance, you watch for traffic, you maintain awareness, all of that at once. There's a lot going on, right? So how are you going to make sure that you're not getting lost and that you're staying situationally aware?
Using that airport diagram and really paying attention to what the ground markings are and what the taxiway signs say. And
yep. ForeFlight has a great feature. If you have an iPad that has GPS, it will kind of show you on the airport diagram where you are as you're going. It's kind of very useful. So you can see what's coming up. Obviously, learning your airport signs to make sure. If you're on a specific taxiway, what is the color of that sign?
It's a black background with yellow lettering.
Yep. And then if it's a directional sign for a taxiway.
Yellow background with a black lettering.
Yep. Yellow.
And an arrow.
Yellow background. And then there's going to be an arrow with the black lettering. Absolutely. You're taxiing around and it's pretty windy. Let's say that the wind is coming directly from your right side as you're taxiing. What are you going to do?
I'm going to push the ailerons towards that side.
Into the wind.
Into the wind.
Like this.
Yep.
Yeah. Why?
Because you're getting airflow over the wings, so you can use that to help steer some.
So when you put ailerons in this direction, what happens to the aileron on the right?
It's pointing down, right?
Thumbs up, ailerons up. That's how you remember.
On the right.
You're holding the flight control with your thumbs up.
Yeah.
Thumbs up, ailerons up. So that aileron is up.
That aileron.
Opposite aileron is down.
Okay.
You're going to do that during your check. I've learned that when I was a student pilot, and I still say it to this day. Grab the flight control, thumbs up, ailerons up, opposite aileron down. Thumbs up, ailerons up, opposite aileron down. And that way you verify that your flight controls are actually connected correctly. Yeah. It's very important. So that aileron comes up. So what it does is if the wind comes in, then it's going to kind of keep you, grounded. What if it's coming from behind us?
You do opposite?
You do the opposite. So you're going to push in and then in the opposite direction that way. And then if it's coming from right here, you're going to do this and, kind of pull back. So it's all about trying to prevent the wind from catching the wing and flipping you over. So let's go back to airport signs. There is some types of sign that are mandatory. What color are those?
Red.
Red background. What kind of letter? What color?
Red.
No, background is red. What color?
Oh, and white.
White letters. Yeah. What are those mandatory ones? Do you have examples of?
Runways.
Yeah.
Do not enter areas.
Direction. We talked about these. Yellow with black text, black letterings on them, and then an arrow. And then the location is the opposite, right? It's the reverse bumblebee. Destination, pointing towards like a terminal or towards a runway, not a taxiway. On the runway, we have numbers that count down. What are those?
Those are your remaining runway length in thousands of feet.
Yep.
Black background, white lettering.
Yep. So if you see 1,
got 1,000 feet left.
Yeah. Better be off the ground pretty quickly.
Or you better be stopping.
Or stopping. Yeah. At some airport, the taxiway center line is normally like a solid yellow line.
Okay.
But you notice that there is a dash yellow line on both sides of that. That's as you approach the hold short line, there is like extra text on top of it.
Oh, I don't remember what it's called, but it's basically, hey, it's a warning you're approaching a runway.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's called the enhanced centerline. I think about it as like bold letters, right? It's like, okay, pay attention. It's the enhanced centerline for the taxiway. Now, let's say that you, by mistake, cross the hold short line without clearance. What is that called?
A runway incursion.
Runway incursion. That is not a good thing, right? How do we avoid runway incursions?
Paying attention.
Paying extra attention. Yeah. Especially by doing what?
Double checking where
you are.
Going, where we're turning.
Yeah. Looking at the airport diagram in detail.
Yep.
Yeah. And then
looking at those signs.
And really paying attention to that hold short line. You see that hold short line, you really have to stop. And then talking to tower or to ground if you don't know where you are or if you're unsure. Runway incursion is the last thing you want to do, right? We had an incident not that long ago recorded on video from a Southwest.
Yeah, it was Southwest and I think a FlexJet.
Yeah, Southwest flight that was coming into land. And then, the FlexJet aircraft just ignored completely what they were told, which I think they read back, which is even worse, right?
Mm-hmm.
And just blasted through. And right before that Southwest flight was about to land, went around and just had the foresight to see it. That could have been hundreds of people dead right there. Mm-hmm. So runway incursion have consequences, especially at very large airport, but really anywhere. At some airports, there's this single dash yellow line that is across a taxiway. So dash yellow line across the taxiway. Do you know what that is? Very rare.
Taxiway holding position?
Yes, taxiway holding position. It's called a taxiway to taxiway holding position. What does that do?
It just adds a place for you to basically be stopped.
Yeah, so the tower might tell you go up to there and then hold short of this taxiway intersection, and then that's what you would do. There's another one that's called a runway to runway hold short position. What is that?
It's for land and hold short operations?
Yeah, lasso operation. It's basically a hold short line on the runway before you get to the other runway. So that's typically where you need to stop. If there is lasso operation in operation, then you need to stop before that. Let's talk about taxiways some more. As you near the end of taxiway Delta, you're getting close to runway 21 left here in Prescott. You notice that the taxiway edge sign goes from solid to dash. What do those dash line actually mean? Do you know?
I don't remember.
So that means that you can actually leave the defined taxiway that's right there. If it's solid, don't cross the edge. But if it's dash, then it's okay to go like to a run-up area, for example. So here in Prescott, as you approach the runway end on 21 left and on taxiway Delta, the taxiway kind of changes from a solid line to a dash line. Do you know what that means? That's the taxiway edge marking.
Maybe that you're near like a run-up area or somewhere else where you can kind of go and hang out for a few minutes if you need to.
Yeah, it kind of spreads into the run-up area. So it means that now it's kind of like on the road, right? If you have a solid line, technically you can't cross it for passing. Here, it's kind of the same idea. It's a dash line, so it means that you can actually cut over the edge of that taxiway marking and then go into a run-up area or kind of expand. As it gets wider, that just gives you more freedom. You also might notice that there is a yellow line across the taxiway that looks like a ladder. And you may have seen this in the written exam. It has to do with instrument approaches. No, you don't remember?
I don't remember.
ILS critical area.
Okay.
So the ILS critical area is, if the weather is IFR, actually, you need to hold short of that to prevent interference from the people that are shooting the ILS. There have been accidents recorded when aircraft have entered the ILS critical area and created interference with people that are landing. So pretty important. So yeah, it looks like a ladder, like a solid ladder in yellow markings. Okay, so now we're getting ready to take off, right? There's a heavy jet in front of us, probably going to Denver or LA here in Prescott. They just took off right ahead of you. What are some things that you should be paying attention to or aware of?
Wake turbulence.
Wake turbulence, okay. What should you do in order to avoid the turbulence on departure?
Take off before they took off, or wait.
Before they lifted off the
lift
ground.
off. Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. You need to be off and getting out of there before the location they took off.
Why is that?
Because the wake turbulence, the vortices are going to descend.
Yep, they sink.
They sink.
They sink below. So for takeoff, it should be pretty easy. These aircraft take way more runway than you do for that. On landing, it's a bit more tricky, right? Because you're coming in on landing. That turbulence might be in the way of where you're going to be landing. So land long in this case. It would be... and then you should wait about 3 minutes after they take off. That's going to help the turbulence kind of dissipate. So you're on your way to Cottonwood now. We talked about this. It's a non-towered airport, which means that there's no controller telling you what to do. But that doesn't mean that there aren't any rules. That's very important. You're expected to enter the pattern in a standard way. What's the actual purpose of the traffic pattern? And do you remember the different legs?
Yes, I remember the different legs.
Yeah.
The point is to try to keep the flow of traffic orderly and make it so that nobody hits one another.
Yep. And it's an untowered airport, so that's never going to happen. How would you know the information about traffic pattern layouts, which direction to go, and all of that?
It's all in the chart supplement.
Yep.
There's also the segmented circle on the field. Potentially,
yep. What's a standard pattern as far as directions of turn and altitude?
So 90-degree turns, right?
Yeah,
I mean, it's a box.
Yes. Oh, you're doing left turn or right turns?
Left turns.
Left turns for standard. And then what altitude?
Up to about 1,000 feet above the ground.
1,000 feet above the ground. Okay. And that's for small aircraft.
Mm-hmm.
Some airports have for larger aircraft at 1,500 feet. Typical is left turn 1,000 feet. Cottonwood has 2 runways, 1432, and then the traffic pattern is actually 800 feet AGL. And then a right turn, right pattern for runway 32, otherwise left turn. So now let's say that there's a Cherokee already in the pattern for runway 32. They decided that's where they're going to go. How do you decide if runway 32 is actually the right choice?
Listen to whatever the available weather is on the field.
Yeah.
Or look for a windsock or a tetrahedron.
Yeah.
Something like that.
So the first time you get to the airport, I always recommend you overfly the airport at 1,500 feet. Not just me, the FAA recommends that as well. Overfly 500 feet above traffic pattern. Look at condition of the runway. Look at the windsock. And then if somebody is in the pattern landing with a tailwind, then you might want to wait until they're done with their shenanigans and then switch over the pattern.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not easy to do, especially if it's a busy area, because at a towered airport, the controller is going to say, okay, we're switching runways, so then they give everybody directions. But if you're at an uncontrolled, it can be a bit more difficult if it's busy. So almost never land with a tailwind, but there are some situations where you might have to with a very light tailwind, okay? I'm not saying it's a good idea, but there are some situations with when you have 1 knot or 2 knots of tailwind, it might be just something that you do, you know? So you mentioned entering midfield downwind. What does that look like? Why do you enter midfield downwind? And then you mentioned a teardrop. What does that mean?
The teardrop basically allows you to see the entire pattern while you enter. So you aren't going to be coming in on someone or something like that.
Yeah. So walk me through this. You're 5 miles out of the airport. You're going to overfly the airport at what altitude? Traffic pattern is 800.
At 800, probably 13 to 1,500.
Yeah, 1,300, so 500 feet above. You're going to set yourself up to kind of cross the crosswind.
Yeah, perpendicular to the runway.
Yes, so you're coming perpendicular to the runway and then basically crossing over where you're going to end up being in the downwind, right? And then going further away and then making your right turn as you start to descend. So the key here is to start to descend after you cross that. Some people, and they have a point, say that starting to cross over the traffic pattern at 1500 can be dangerous because larger aircraft use the pattern at 1500, which they have a point. So I would always be careful. Don't always just look at traffic at 1,000 feet below you. Also look at traffic that might be at 1500 in there. Or you can start your descent slightly before that. Typically, it works pretty well because larger aircraft tend to do a straight-in approach anyway to those airports. But something to keep in mind is 500 feet above might be where larger aircraft are at. Okay, so we do that. We do a right turn, start to descend, and then join the downwind kind of in the middle of the runway at 800 feet above in this case. And then now you're established into your downwind. Okay, that's cool. So you get there, you're in your downwind. Now you turn to base, you turn to final. How do you know that you're on the right glide path at the airport?
There may be indicators available.
Okay. Can you name some?
The PAPI and the VASI.
PAPI and the VASI. What's the difference?
The configuration.
Yep. PAPI looks like what?
It's 4 lights in a row, and the VASI is 4 lights in a square, so 2 by 2.
2 by 2.
Square.
Yeah. So VASI, 2 bars. How do you know you're too high?
They're all white.
All white? Yeah. How do you know you're too low?
All red.
Okay. And then what if you're right on glide path?
Half and half. Red on top, white on the bottom.
Red on top, white at the bottom. Okay. And then the PAPI?
It's a scale basically from 1 to 4 of red versus white lights.
Yep.
4 white is too high, 4 red is too low.
And then where would be the whites? On the left or on the right?
On the right?
No, on the left.
Oh.
Yeah.
50-50.
three whites, 1 red. Yeah. And then now you're on final. Okay. And right as you're on final, another airplane, because it's Cottonwood, pulls out on the runway and is getting ready to line up because they weren't listening on the radio. What do?
Go around.
You don't yell at them? Just kidding.
I mean, maybe both.
No, you go around first.
The first thing is, yeah.
Yeah. No, you go around. What's the procedure for going around?
I don't know. I mean, I can guess.
Yeah. Apply full power.
Full power, call that you're going around, and then maybe the reason if at an untowered airport like that.
Yeah.
But so that if there's somebody behind you, they don't go crashing into them instead.
No, you definitely call it out. And then you try again, right? You're on the upwind, you make a left turn, and then you're going to try that pattern again. Okay, let's talk about operation at night. And let's start with kind of non-towered airports. So it's dark. You get into Cottonwood. Let's say it's dark. You had to go around 50 times because people keep cutting you off. Now it gets really dark. Let's say that in real life, let's say you went there and then you had dinner and then now you're ready to leave, right? Now it's
okay.
Dark outside. Let's talk about the aircraft lights.
Okay.
What kind of lights do we have on the airplane? And where are they? And what color?
You have strobe lights. You have one on the tail and then one on the front of each of the wingtips. And then you have nav lights.
When do we use those strobe lights?
All the time?
Yeah. For takeoff and landing, typically at night.
Okay.
We turn them off during taxi.
Okay.
Because you're going to turn them on before you start the engine, just to let people know. But typically at night, you're going to turn them off so that you don't blind other people.
Okay.
Otherwise, during the day, yeah, you're right. Okay. So strobe lights.
Nav lights. And
yep, nav lights.
We have red, green, and white.
Yep.
The red is on the left wing.
From the inside the cockpit. Yeah.
Green is on the other wing, and then the white is on the tail.
When do we turn those on?
All the time.
No, nav lights are only sunset to sunrise, only at night. Okay. We don't need them during the day. They're not visible. Okay, what else?
Landing light.
Landing light.
It's like headlight, faces forward.
Yeah. And usually we turn those off during taxi unless they're needed.
Okay.
Again, because they will blind people. I like to turn mine on when I taxi during the day for additional visibility, but at night, slightly different. So landing light, and then most airplanes also have right next to it a taxi light.
Okay.
So landing light is going to light up high beam and low beam.
Okay.
Exactly. So taxi light is going to be more like lighting up the front of the aircraft. Mm-hmm. And then if somebody else comes in the other direction, typically you're going to, or if you're going to face them for a while, turn those off. Just to be nice. Okay.
And then beacon.
And then the beacon.
Which is red on top of the tail.
Yep. And that's usually when the engine is running, we turn that on.
Okay.
And to let people know. On the runway and on a taxiway, we also have lights. Do you know what kind of lighting we have on taxiways?
So many different types.
Yeah, let's call it two types: centerline and edge lights.
And edge lights. So centerline is green.
Green.
Until you get close to the runway.
Yeah.
And then it's green and yellow onto the runway.
Yeah.
And then the edge lights are blue.
Blue, that's right. And not all airports have edge lights.
Okay.
So just be aware of that. And then runway lights, there are also a few. Do you know what those are?
They're white.
Yep.
Until you get down to the last 3,000 feet of runway.
Well, you're right. On the center line, the last 3,000 feet are going to be a different color.
Yeah.
And that's white and red for 2,000 and then red for the last 1,000. And it's the same on the opposite direction. And then the edge lights, what color are those?
I want to say they're white, but...
And then on instrument runways, they're going to be yellow at the last 2,000.
Okay.
Yeah. There's a lot of lights. Quite frankly, I don't always remember all of them top of my head. But when I see them, I know what they are when you get to the airport. Well, let's say you get to the airport, right? And there's no one in the tower, obviously, to turn on the lights for you. Can you turn on the lights at the airport yourself?
You can. You can click the microphone a certain amount of times and the lights will turn on.
Yeah. Do you remember the number of times?
I think it was 3, 5, and 7 for the different intensities.
That's right. So what I used to do when I flew in Florida on cross countries, because I was bored at night, and it helps, you get to an airport as you're flying next to it. And then especially we flew like around the coast. And there were a ton of airports along the coast. Mm-hmm. And so you tune in and then you turn on the lights and you're like, oh, that's the airport. And you verify that that's the airport that you're flying next to. That's before we had GPS. So how do you depart the airport? You're going to apply takeoff. What's the procedure? Do you fly straight? When do you turn?
Straight out until you've cleared the traffic pattern or above the altitude?
Yeah, clear out the traffic pattern. And then you're going to do typically a 45-degree turn to kind of exit and going into the direction of flight. So now you're on your way back to Prescott, right? From a distance, spot a few colors flashing in the horizon in the distance. There's a green one and a white one that are flashing. What does that tell you about the airport?
That it's a civil land airport.
Yep. What if it's two whites and one green?
Then it's a military airport.
Military airport. White and yellow?
It is a seaport.
Yep, water airport. And then green, yellow, and white.
That's helipad.
Yeah, that's a good challenge.
Red Bull has entered the chat.
That's right. Don't do that. Okay. So yeah, those are the beacons on top. And when you see them on the ground, by the way, they're really bright. They're easily visible from a distance. When I flew in Melbourne, we had a military airports co-located. It was two class Delta airspace that were kind of like an embryo put together, but split. They were two different things. So when you get closer to Melbourne, you could see the Melbourne one and it was Patrick Air Force Base from the military airport. You could see the difference between the two very easily. And you knew you were in Melbourne because you had those two very close to each other. So now you're getting closer to Prescott. ATC is going to give you vectors for a left base for runway 21 left. That's the big runway, right? Mm-hmm. It's pretty dark out. What kind of lighting can you expect on this type of runway? And obviously you've looked at the chart supplement, so you should know what kind of lights are there, right?
It's the big runway, so I'm going to guess that there are going to be the like instrument approach lights that kind of like guide you in. It looks like an arrow, right?
Yep.
Or like leading you to the end of the runway.
Yeah, you've seen those in movies all the time, right?
Yeah, they love to show them, and it looks cool, you know. You should be able to see the outline of the runway with the white lights.
Yep.
You could probably see a bunch of taxiway stuff as well, but we don't really care about that right now. If it's equipped, the lights on the threshold that flash, I think they're white too.
Yes. Remember what they're called? Rail. Yeah. Runway edge identification lights. Those you will be able to see as well. I mean, that's it, really. There's a ton, obviously, going on at airports. We talked about lasso operation as well. Can you do lasso operation yourself as a student pilot?
No.
And then also, do you have to accept lasso operation?
No.
No, you don't, right? So
controller might not be happy with you, but
yeah. But if you accept it,
you got to do it.
You got to do it, okay? Before you accept, you have to make sure that whatever the available runway, where do you find that information, by the way? The landing distance, the available landing distance in lasso operation. Do you know where that is?
It's in the chart supplement.
Yep, it's in the chart supplement.
It's like TO something, right?
Well, no, that's different. Okay,
Okay.
good. That's good. I'm glad you mentioned that. There is the TORA, the TODA,
Yep.
the ALSDA, and then the LDA. So those are different. Those are declared distances at the airport. TORA, takeoff runway available, takeoff distance available, the TODA. They're usually close to being the same. The difference is that one of them has a distance available, which means it's no longer runway, but it could be used for, continue to go. ASDA, accelerated stop distance available. That's for larger aircraft. And then LDA, landing distance available. So those are typically published for each of the runway in each direction. The landing and hold short in itself has its own little section on top of that, where it talks sometimes about airport services, for example. If you have fuel, oxygen, there's a section there that talks about this, and then it will kind of name the distance. So we'll say if you're landing on this runway, 21 left in our case, you have to hold short of this runway, 1230, and you have 4,000, whatever it is, available for landing. So that's all going to be spelled out. Well, you survived the signs and the markings and the lightings and even the lasso operation. So I'd say you're officially airport literate. So congratulations. Now, most pilots, they worry about landing, but the truth is half of the challenge is just finding your way to and from the runway safely and then without really getting lost. I mean, that's important. We don't want to get lost at the airport. So if you've got a wild story about, airport operation, maybe flying at your small favorite airport or anything else, drop it down in the comments. We read all of the comments. And then if you're training for your certificate, make sure that you check out the Private Pilot Made Easy course. We go in way more details with a few more animations about all of these topics. And as always, thanks for watching. And then don't forget to turn on your strobe lights after you land so you let people know where you are. But seriously, don't be that guy. Thanks for watching.